You're about to hear from me is actually not even really a new story. However, the update pertaining to it actually is. And I wish I would have learned or knew more about this story when it first came out over the summer. But in this picture, you see a man by the name of David Merryman, and he was a landlord out of Virginia. And this man has been sentenced to 17 years in prison after he stole black tenants' identity in order to cash pandemic benefits. Now, here's the thing. I'm willing to bet that black people weren't his only tenants, but black tenants were the ones he took their identities from. So basically, before I even get into the article, I see how this scheme of his was trying to pull. Take their identities, use their identities to cash in on these pandemic benefits. He'll get all the money, and if he was to get caught, then it wouldn't fall onto him because according to them, he doesn't exist in their database for people trying to commit these frauds. It would go and fall onto the tenants. Now, I don't know how they caught him. I'm glad they did, but we about to get into it to find out exactly how this fraud went down and how they caught him, which ultimately led to him getting sentenced to 17 years. David Merryman, a 59-year-old Virginia man, has been sentenced to almost 20 years in prison for harassing black tenants with racial slurs when they lived in his properties and stealing their identities to cash in and make requests for pandemic relief funds. So not only was this man taking their identities to use for his own personal gain, an illegal one at that, but he was also anti-black as well. Surprise, surprise. And this is Virginia we're talking about here. Merryman has been sentenced to 17 years in prison on the charges of wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and race-based interference with housing and employment for his behavior at over 60 different rental properties in the Newport and Hampton area. According to prosecutors, Merryman fraudulently obtained large initial payments in the form of security deposits, prepaid rent, and other fees for rental homes that were in poor repair between 2019 and January of this year. And when they're talking about January of this year, they're talking about January 2023. After obtaining information about the tenants and stealing their payments, he would attempt to evict them quickly to get in new tenants to scam. So now we have another layer here. That's crazy. So he took their identities to get money for himself and then tried to evict them so he could bring in new fresh meat and do the same thing over and over. So it was like a revolving door, a cycle of what this guy was doing. While his scheme ran during the pandemic, Merryman went as far as to forge the signatures of some of his tenants, all while threatening to evict them, when the federal and state governments systemically released relief funds for renters. The properties Merryman targeted were intentionally located in low-income areas, focusing on poor black tenants who were vulnerable to his schemes as they had nowhere else to live. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Virginia reported that many of the homes were in abysmal condition and often had holes in the ceilings, leaks, and rodents or pests in the home. While committing fraud on several families, Merryman, who was white, also racially harassed his black tenants and forced them to pay repeated and constructed security deposits under the pretense of making repairs that he never completed. As reported by Law and Crime in October 2022, Merryman rented a home that had no working stove or refrigerator to a black man and charged an initial deposit of $1,000 and a move-in deposit of $1,600 about 2 weeks later, promising to fix it. He later ordered the tenant to pay over $1,000 at a later time, but when the tenant finally asked Merryman to come and make the promised repairs, the Virginia man said, "You people, man, it's always the black ones that have got to have the problem with moving in." Listen to that. This guy literally tried to make it seem like it was this black guy's fault for doing stuff that, or for this slumlord, let's just call it what it is, not doing what he was supposed to do. Meanwhile, robbing this man blind. In another recent incident, Merryman and several men walked onto a tenant's property uninvited. When the renting tenant exited the home to confront the landlord, Merryman threatened them with a brick and potentially a firearm. During the incident, Merryman called the tenant a black MFer and a effing N-word repeatedly. U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, Jessica Aber, stated in a press release, David Merryman deliberately targeted families or targeted black families with limited means and housing options. Landlords have a responsibility under the law to uphold housing rights and protect the human dignity of the people to whom they rent. Mr. Merryman failed to uphold that responsibility and is paying a heavy price for his racial discrimination and fraud. And like I said, this story actually came to light in July. Well, it did pop up on my radar because I think because around the time when the story came out, or at least when I was looking it up, one of the earliest videos or news broadcasts I saw about it was on July 31st. Of course, around that time, that was right after the RNC and right before the DNC. So it was a heavy, it was a lot of political movement at that time. So of course, a story like this, it would have been very easy for a story like this to get buried underneath all the fluff that was going on during the election cycle. But this update right here from the article that I read from got posted on December 31st, 2024. But I think it actually came out slightly a couple days before that. But either way, now we're aware of this story. The man has been sentenced to 17 years. Personally, if it were up to me, he would have gotten more. I think the more shocking thing that is with this is that he only got 17 years is the fact that he got charged and sentenced and convicted at all of this, because they could have gave him a slap on the wrist, in which of course this would have turned into an Operation Protect the White Boy video. But he's going for 17 years. I think now they say he's 59, so he'll be in his late 70s by the time he gets out of jail. But yeah, this guy was running that scheme, they said, since 2019 up until January of last year, and tried to make the tenants make it seem like it's their fault for what was going on. Meanwhile, he was going outside of his job realm and doing this. And like they said, he intentionally went and targeted black families because he felt it was going to be easier for him to con and scheme them, considering they were on the low income side of it. So he figured, oh, they're on the low income side of it, so it'll be very easy for me to pull this off. But I'm glad he got exposed. I'm glad he's getting exactly what he deserves. Furthermore, they need to put him in Gen Pop. That's where they need to put him at, and see if he can try to run any schemes and scams while he's in there. Good luck.